If the government is confiscating your money in one way or another, what should you do? Well, our next guest says you should turn to Bitcoin. Bitcoin is a solution to a lot of the world's financial problems, and this is exactly why you should own it. Layah Heilpern is the author of Undressing Bitcoin and a revealing guide to the world's most revolutionary asset. Welcome, Layah, to Kitco. It's a pleasure to have you.
Hi, David. Great to be here. Really excited to get into all this with you.
Yeah, really excited to speak with you as well. Your book was a great read. I'm going to pick out some chapters that I particularly like. You talked about Bitcoin being not a scam, which is a clarification that we need to cover. And you talked about the use cases of Bitcoin. But first, I want to talk about what Bitcoin can do to protect you against the government. Now, the government has done some good for society, but has also been at the forefront of some of the not so pleasant things, among which is confiscating your money, or in your words, indirectly confiscating it through taxation and inflation. So let's talk about that first. How does Bitcoin solve the problem of governments creating inflation, either through money printing or other issues?
Yeah, sure. So we can start with inflation, right? So right now, we don't really have a set monetary policy. Ideally, the goal is to hit a target of around globally 2% inflation. We understand that that's the goal. And so people can actually start to prepare accordingly for that. But because monetary policy isn't set in stone and those at the top can do what they want, they end up printing endless amounts of money. Very simple supply and demand. If you print endless amounts of money, what does that do to the money already sitting in people's pockets? It loses value. We've seen that happen all over the world, particularly in Venezuela. They just printed the money into worthlessness. So how does anything have money if you could just create it from thin air? You can't. So it loses value, right? So that's like this simple point. Bitcoin, on the other hand, has a limited supply of 21 million. So there will only ever be 21 million coins. No more can ever be created. And, we can get into the technicalities of if there was some form of vote or whatever it is, and they could, we decide to change the laws of the network, that's not really going to happen. And if it does happen, it would be a different network. And it would go off into sort of like a fork. We call it like a hard fork. But ultimately, the original network would still stay the same. And people who vote on the network to potentially have those changes, they're incentivized, financially incentivized to vote on the best outcome for the network, and increasing the supply of Bitcoin would not be a good outcome. So 21 million, that is the limited supply. So that's really important. And I know people often say, how is Bitcoin that hedge against inflation given, we're down more than 70% from its all-time high of $69,000 or just under. But we've crashed to the highs of the previous bull market. We're still up 400% since the money printing started, and the crash in March 2020. So all you have to do is zoom out and be patient and look at the long-term view. So that's that in terms of inflation and why I believe Bitcoin is a hedge against it. Because inflation, of course, is confiscation of money, just through devaluation. But in terms of actual physical confiscation, so we can look at Lebanon as an example, because inflation was they had hyperinflation in Lebanon. Banks started to actually limit the amount of money that people were able to withdraw. As a result, this is on a monthly basis, right? As a result, people in Lebanon were actually banging on the vaults of their banks to try and get their money back. It's literally a bank run. The same similar situation happened in Cyprus called the Cypriot haircut of 2013. Not a lot of people know this because, again, they often think, this only happens in Lebanon, it only happens in Venezuela. Right. No, it happens locally as well. Europe, it happens in North America, which I'll get to after. But the Cypriot haircut of 2013 was basically the second largest bank in Cyprus needed to be bailed out. And the EU commissioners simply did what I'm about to say because they simply had the authority to do it. So what they did was they confiscated, I think it's around 47.5% of money of people who had over 100,000 euros in the bank account. So if you had over 100,000 euros in your bank account in Cyprus, 47.5% of that money was confiscated, really actually confiscated in order to bail out the bank. People literally woke up one day with their life savings gone. And I actually know as a matter of fact that this was a key turning point for many Europeans in getting into Bitcoin. So now we touched on inflation, touched on Lebanon, we've touched on Cyprus. Let's talk about Canada, where you are. So Canada, that friendly country with that lovely prime minister, who's a real do-gooder, he's a feminist, he's just such a do-gooder, right? Well, under his regime, people who decided to protest against medical mandates, they had their bank accounts frozen. And this is really important because I don't think people necessarily understand the seriousness of having your bank account frozen. Because if you don't have freedom of money, you don't have freedom to do anything. You can't eat. Right?
Yeah.
If you can't eat, then that's it. You can't go anywhere. You can't do anything. Money is literally energy. It's the energy which powers everything you do in life. So if they freeze your bank accounts and they freeze your money because you hold the incorrect opinion, it's just shocking. And so moving to something like Bitcoin is a lot better. And so Canada actually realized this, which is funny. And they started to crack down on the on Canadian registered exchanges. And they asked these exchanges to freeze the bank accounts, the wallet addresses, the exchange accounts of certain individuals. Exactly. And of course, they could simply do that because these are registered, legitimate companies. However, if you hold your Bitcoin in a non-custodial way, which means removing it from an exchange. So there's no third party. So now we have no bank, we have no exchange, we have no custodian. There's no third party. It's just you and your Bitcoin. They can't confiscate it.
Right.
So that's why Bitcoin is a much better option.
Layah, some might argue, okay, fine. So you brought up an interesting point, well, a lot of points, but let me touch on the fact that the government of Canada did in fact try, or in some cases did succeed in blocking the exchange accounts of some of the truckers that were in Ottawa. Now, the problem here, Layah, is that this argument kind of proves that there is some government intervention in the Bitcoin sphere, that the governments can directly control or limit the way you access your Bitcoin, unless, of course, you put it in a wallet, which not everybody has or understands that is important to have, right? So we can't say that governments have zero control over Bitcoin because clearly they can. I mean, in the case of China, for example, they actually banned holding Bitcoin.
But they don't touch Bitcoin. So this is what I'm saying. So they might be able to ban it on in a layer 2 sense, right? Which is like that on ramp and off ramp.
Right.
They can ban it. They can ban the intermediary. But did China touch Bitcoin? No. Did they touch the network? No. Did they physically confiscate any Bitcoin in Canada? No. You literally can't do that. Now you can ban Bitcoin. Sure. You can't stop Bitcoin. So in relation to that point about China, yes, they banned Bitcoin mining, but number one, people still mine Bitcoin and they still hold Bitcoin in China, but that's whatever. Of course it had a short-term effect on the network because a lot of miners obviously had to go offline, which affected the network. They had to relocate. But within a few months, the hash power was back up, everything was back up, and the network was working perfectly fine. So regardless of what China wanted to do, it didn't really matter. Now back to Canada, yes, they did speak to these exchanges, but this has nothing to do with Bitcoin at its core. It has nothing to do with it. They can't touch the decentralization. And so I believe Canada, some of the police departments tried to then go a step further when they realized that there were still people sending money peer-to-peer without that third party. They tried to speak to these software companies who basically develop the interface which allows you to trade peer-to-peer with no third party. Right. And one of those was Nunchuck. And they asked Nunchuck for the addresses and everything like that. And Nunchuck actually replied saying, hi, thanks for reaching out, but unfortunately, we can't give you that information. We literally don't have it. And we also can't stop it or ban it or whatever it is that you want. And that is by design. Yeah. And when the Canadian dollar then goes to zero, they said, we'll be here to serve you too, which I thought was amazing. And so it really just hones in the point that, this is by design and we can continue to trade peer-to-peer. We can continue to do this without a third party, regardless of what any government wants to implement.
Well, let's suppose you and I want to escape the oppressive regimes of our government, whether it be Trudeau's government or Biden's government or the Venezuelan government, whatever have you, right? Iraqi government. Now, you have a wallet, I have a wallet. You and I can exchange peer-to-peer without any third-party intervention. But then the criticism here, Layah, is what do I do with that Bitcoin? Suppose I don't live in El Salvador, or suppose I don't live in the Central African Republic where these countries have Bitcoin is legal tender. I can't actually do anything with my Bitcoin unless I go on an exchange. And remember, the government doesn't like me, Layah, so they blocked me from exchanges. So now I can't actually do anything with the money. I can't buy anything, right? How would you respond to that?
Yeah, I mean, look, it is obviously an unfortunate situation to be in, but I don't think it's a situation which is necessarily going to entirely come about. And I think, by that point, if we did get to that sort of situation, we have to realize that not all countries are actually going to be on the same page. You might have, North America, parts of Europe, China or whatever, having such very, very harsh restrictions, maybe banning you completely from the entire fiat system and, you're solely dependent on Bitcoin. Not all countries are going to be on the same page. And we know this because of the last 2 years. They've all taken different approaches towards COVID and everything that's happened. So, they're not all, World Economic Forum run countries. Some countries are truly independent. And so you would simply leave, you would flee to a country which offers you better opportunity. And we see people do that anyway, whether it's Edward Snowden, just for other reasons. So there's that. But, there's also, you can also buy things online with Bitcoin. There are many different places that allow you, that work as intermediaries so you can make that payment. There's also really interesting new software which is coming up right now, which are non-KYC Visa cards. So this essentially allows you to send your Bitcoin to a Visa card, no identification. Of course, there's a limit as to how much you're allowed for that company to even abide by AML regulatory laws in the US, and probably the same in Canada and Europe as well. But you can send your Bitcoin to that card. It switches back to fiat and you can spend it. So, and it's totally anonymous. So they're not going to know. So there's a lot of different innovative things that are happening. So different innovative things that are happening. Not every single country is going to be on the same page. And you can actually buy a lot of different things with Bitcoin. I believe actually New Hampshire in the US is very Bitcoin friendly. I know a guy that lives entirely off of crypto, groceries and everything. People are paying their rent in Bitcoin.
Does he live in the metaverse? Everything's paid for in Bitcoin?
No, he lives in New Hampshire in the US, in the real world. And yeah, he's able to pay for pretty much everything in cryptocurrency.
I wonder if and when the governments will say, you know what, I think it's time to put an end to paying for things with Bitcoin because we can't stop you from doing it, we can't directly control you and how you spend your money, assuming, of course, the government wants control. Do you think, Layah, there ever will be a time when Bitcoin will not be allowed to be used as a medium of exchange online on, let's say, Amazon or any of the other vendors that you're talking about? Maybe the government will say, no, stop it. You guys can't do this anymore.
Yeah, it's a good question. But I just don't see that happening. Digital currencies, this digital world is literally the future. It's inevitable. And like I said, not every single country is going to be on the same page. And so I really think that the US, for example, is in a position whereby, the US doesn't have a Bitcoin spot ETF right now. And they're trying to figure out, the regulators are trying to figure out, we can't stop this. Otherwise we get left behind. So how do we do this whereby we can still get a piece of the pie? And I think that's where we're at. They won't stop it because they will be left behind. And does the US want to be left behind? No. Does Canada want to be left behind? No. Suddenly the UK are talking about being this crypto hub, which is hilarious for me as a British person. So even the most stale of countries, the UK, is still very keen on being pioneers of this technology. They just need the time to figure out how they can take a piece of the pie. And when that happens, I think adoption will blow up from there. Okay.
I want to read a brief paragraph here from your book about Ponzi schemes. So you wrote that unlike a Ponzi scheme, Bitcoin is a decentralized network where investors have full autonomy over the funds, making it a trustless system. Ultimately, due to its core values, it is impossible for Bernie Madoff and other crooks to buy Ferraris and 44 mansions with your Bitcoin. As the network has no central authority, your funds were never in their crooked custody in the first instance, but rather securely locked away on the blockchain. All right, I'll let you explain that, and I'll have a few follow-up questions.
Yeah, sure. So essentially, people look at Bitcoin as a Ponzi scheme. I don't know why they do, but I'm here to break it down. I'm going to tell you why it's not a Ponzi scheme. So the most simple and obvious reason as to why it's not a Ponzi scheme is because at the end of the day, a Ponzi scheme will basically collapse once the number one crook runs off with all the money, like Bernie Madoff, right? Made off with everyone's money. So with Bitcoin, if every single person, if every investor removed their money, the whole thing would not collapse. With a Ponzi scheme, if all the investors withdrew, the whole thing would collapse, a little bit like a bank run. So what really is the Ponzi scheme is the traditional financial system, because if everybody removes their money, there's no money left. With Bitcoin, what would happen is the network would still continue to run, albeit the price would be lower because apparently people don't see it as very valuable anymore. And so in order to make a market, the price would naturally be lower for more buyers. But the network would continue to run. Every 10 minutes, another block would be added to the blockchain. And so Bitcoin will continue to survive regardless of whether everybody pulls out their money. And then as well, like I said, Bernie Madoff can run off with everybody's money. There's no CEO that's running off with your money with Bitcoin. There's literally no CEO. There's no, centralized power. There's no committee. There's no council that's running off with all your money. It's just not how the network is built. So I think, I do understand people, would look at Bitcoin as a Ponzi scheme,
right?
Because it's new and it sounds scary and weird and must be dangerous. But it's very clearly not. And I think it just takes a second to sort of figure that out.
So if a Ponzi scheme were to be undressed, pun intended, usually it would happen. Usually it would happen because, like you said, people are pulling their money away from the fund or the scheme. Now, suppose every holder of Bitcoin on the planet sells, and nobody owns any more Bitcoin. Do you think the price could go to zero then? In that case?
Look, I mean, anything can go to zero in these weird black swan unusual events, like oil's trading at negative prices in March 2020. But Bitcoin, number one, it's just not going to happen. But yes, of course, we have to talk in probabilities. There is a probability that if every single person withdrew their money, it would go to zero. But there's value there. Maybe it went to 0.001, I don't know, 0.61.
Because you're saying there's value in the blockchain, right? I mean, even if people don't hold it, the technology still has value.
Absolutely, because you are trading peer-to-peer in an alternative system. Like you said earlier, if for whatever reason you had the wrong opinion and you've been totally blacklisted and you can't do anything,
right?
At least now you have an indiscriminate system where it's not going to discriminate you based on your gender, your color, your race, your views, whatever it is. And it's so funny as well, because we live in a society which is so obsessed with inclusion and all that stuff. But Bitcoin is really the most inclusive network. I mean, I've had somebody ask me, why are Black people more affected by the price crash? And I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about. Bitcoin is the most inclusive network. There's no barrier to entry. It's not like we're talking about, stocks in the US, or we're talking about, other forms of investments in the US, whereby you have to be some form of accredited investor to get involved. This is open to everyone of every single background. So it is the most inclusive network that has ever existed. And so there is always going to be value. The world is always in some weird uproar, whether there's a war going on between Russia and Ukraine, and you need to send aid very quickly, whether you need to escape tyranny. In my book, I talk about Nazi Germany and how the Jews, they had gold in their teeth, and they were and the Nazis confiscated the gold from their teeth, and so a lot of Jews wrapped that gold in bread, swallowed it in order to flee, so they had some form of value wherever they were going. Whereas with Bitcoin, you don't need to be doing that. You just have the keys in your head, and nobody really needs to know what you own and what you don't own. It's very private, and it allows that anonymous. I can't even say the word now. It allows you to be anonymous, and it allows you to flee very, very dangerous regime. So that's what I'm saying. There's always going to be a reason.
You do talk about refugees, and that is a very serious issue that you brought up. But just to throw this example out there for fun, all right? Suppose you're at the border and there's border guards they're being, you know, they're not being very nice. They say, Layah, I want something from you right now, or I'm not letting you pass. You either give them a piece of your jewelry, or you don't have anything. In this case, you have your USB. You can't really scan with the guard.
Yeah.
I mean, in this case, actually, in this particular example, it's probably more beneficial to hold some physical thing, is it not?
No, I disagree. Oh my God. Hell no. Absolutely not. If I can say that. No, absolutely not. Because, you know, look, like I do believe that that humans are somewhat corrupt, but deep down are good people, and you have, you know, guards on a border as you're trying to flee. And I actually brought this up in my interview with Peter Schiff on Fox Business. And I was sort of saying, you know, if you're fleeing with your gold bullion bars, somebody at the border could say to you, hey, you know, I want one of those. But those guards are supposed to let you in. They are supposed to, as a refugee, let you in. There's a path, you know, it's been approved. You're supposed to go through. They're supposed to let you in. If you have something on you that looks expensive and it catches somebody's eye, they are more likely to stop you and not let you in and want it, right? They want the bribe. They want that piece of expensive jewelry or whatever it is. If you have nothing on you, you're more likely to just walk through easily. It's a bit like, you know, wearing a Rolex on your wrist in a dodgy area, you know, like you're not going to want to do that. You're probably safer not wearing it because you don't look like you have anything to offer. And so the path of least resistance, which I think most humans will take, is to just let you walk through.
I think that's why people buy Rolex NFTs now. They don't want to be robbed of the real Rolex. But anyway, that's a separate issue. Okay, so you brought up the Peter Schiff debate. You know, one thing that he said, and he's been an advocate of for a long time, is that Bitcoin has no intrinsic value. Doesn't really have any real world use cases. The whole thing, according to him and people that share his belief, is that it is a Ponzi scheme because the only value is ascribed by investors or speculators. If I assign it a value of $20,000, which is around what it's at now, and Layah says, well, it's actually $10,000, who's right? You know, eventually when I sell, the price is going to go down. There's no actual value. There's no actual use behind the thing. There's no utility behind Bitcoin. How would you respond to that?
Oh, it's such an interesting topic. It's such an interesting area because I think, you know, a lot of the reasons why these people of Peter Schiff's generation can't really understand the value is because it's not something which is tangible. And we are moving into a digital world whereby just because something isn't tangible doesn't mean it doesn't have value. You know, which is really interesting because we now have things like Instagram and Facebook, which have just totally blown up, right? And people find a lot of value in, you know, putting themselves out there in this weird, magical digital space, which sort of doesn't exist. But, you know, their online presence is now suddenly more important than their real life physical presence. And it's just a matter of mentality and matter of just sort of changing that mentality and realizing that in this new digital world, just because it isn't tangible doesn't mean it's not going to have value. So that's number one. The second point, which is funny, is I believe Peter, his bank account was frozen by the US because he was having some issues with taxes or whatever it is. I'm sure, you know, they were wrong for freezing it, and Peter's, you know, not done anything criminal, of course, but he was in a very difficult situation. Is he going to turn to gold to get out of that situation and pay his employees and buy things and, you know, pay people, send money across the world? No, you're not going to send them gold. You send them a gold receipt, which is just as useless as paper.
So if I say to you, Layah, here's a gift, 1 Bitcoin or the equivalent amount in a gold bar.
No, I want it in Bitcoin. Why would I take it in gold? Because this is the thing. Peter, how's Peter going to navigate this situation with gold? He's not. He can't pay his employees. He can't send gold to his family. He needs Bitcoin, a real medium of exchange, something which, you know, something which is portable, something which is divisible, something which can be, yes, divisible, broken down into many different things. And that's the biggest problem with gold, is that it's literally not portable. It's difficult to store. And again, we're in this new digital world. And, you know, I'm not saying that gold is bad. What I'm saying is we need something which is digital gold, and gold receipts and gold tokens are not good because it's not real gold. It's literally a digital version. It's
So
basically
you don't
how
subscribe
money
to
started.
gold stable coins. You don't like that kind of thing.
No, because it's how money started in the first place. It was just they were gold receipts. That's literally what cash is. And then obviously we came off the gold standard.
Yes.
But again, like, how are you storing that gold? But with a third party who can then freeze that gold account that you have. Because your gold is online, because you're trying to digitize it and make it portable. No, you need the Bitcoin network. You need a blockchain. You need cryptography. You need, it to be cryptographically locked away. That's what you need in order to keep your funds absolutely safe and secure.
In your book, you also talked about how Bitcoin helps the underbanked, because a lot of people in the world, actually the majority of the people in the world, especially in the developing areas like Africa, for example, Southeast Asia, they don't actually have bank accounts. And so what people can do now with their smartphones is they can access Bitcoin or other cryptocurrencies and transact, store money that way. Here's one counter argument, though, I've seen online, is that what if you have just a bank that allows you to access funds electronically? I mean, wouldn't that technically be functionally be the same thing, or no?
Well, you are starting to see these new digital banks like Revolut, for example, Sterling, and they don't have branches and you can just open it up. But no, because and I've had experiences with many of these different branchless new digital accounts, and you do one thing wrong, or you don't show them your tax returns on time or something, and you get blacklisted, and now you can't get an account at all. There is so many do this, many different, I won't name them for legal reasons in case they come after me. But they all do this. They all come down and they ask for receipts of everything. And if for whatever reason you can't provide it, and real banks don't even do this, especially in the UK, actual banks aren't going to ask you for source of funds, but these digital banks do. And I think that's the trade-off for not having the branch. That's the trade-off. They ask for these sorts of things, and then they block you, and then you can't have an account with them. And then also you need some form of ID in order to open up these accounts, right? And people, when I talk about banking the unbanked, I'm talking about people in Africa. Many people in Africa don't have that level of ID. People in the United States don't even have a passport, which blows my mind as a British person. So not everybody, and if you don't drive, well, then you definitely don't have, any form of ID. And so many people just don't have the documents required to simply open up these new tech banks, these new fintechs, that's what they're called. These new fintech banks, and so you remain unbanked, and so the best thing to do is to open up. You can open up a wallet like Exodus Wallet, and you don't need to provide any form of ID. And immediately, you now have a wallet. You can start accepting funds. I can't actually remember the exact statistic, but most people I refer to it in my book, and I talk about sub-Saharan Africa and how a very large amount of people there are unbanked, but an even greater amount of people have a smartphone and access to internet. And so these people are now on the financial map. They can start doing business with the rest of the world. You and I connected through Twitter. I connect with the majority of people through Twitter. Most of my work is done through social media. And I could do that from sub-Saharan Africa. I could do it from anywhere in the world. And so these people in these unbanked areas simply need to get a little bit of Wi-Fi, start doing whatever they want to do, whether it's content, whether it's reaching out, sending somebody a resume, whatever it is, they can start building something for themselves and just
money laundering,
Bitcoin,
or money laundering and tax evasion.
Yeah, let's do that. What's the question specifically?
They can do a lot of things, including building themselves, paying people, or illicit activity, right? That's the criticism of Bitcoin. It's used primarily for illicit activity. How would you respond to that?
Yeah, it's a funny one, because cash is actually the greatest form of the greatest way to navigate illicit activity. So it's really interesting that people point to this, because ultimately, I think it was in 2021, between 2 to 5% of global GDP was laundered by fiat currencies, by dollars, euros. This amounts to around $2 trillion US dollars. That's laundered by fiat currencies. Now, according to Chainalysis, whereby you can actually look at the blockchain, you can see what amount of Bitcoin is used for criminal activity. Less than 1% of Bitcoin is used for criminal activity. And that number is getting lower and lower. I believe in 2014, it was higher, but that number is getting lower and lower. And the reason why cash is a far better machine, I guess, or mechanism or tool for illicit activity is because it's entirely anonymous. And this is the thing with Bitcoin. Bitcoin is simultaneously absolutely anonymous, yet entirely traceable. And so people can trace your Bitcoin. They can trace every step of that criminal investigation can be tracked. Every transaction that ever happened, every wallet that it went to can be tracked. And so all they have to do is simply identify one wallet. And it's really not that difficult because, like you mentioned earlier, David, in order to spend that Bitcoin, it's hard. And so people most of the time are forced into cashing out using a KYC exchange, know your customer exchange, whereby you have to provide personal information, and therefore you have to identify yourself with that money. It takes one account. It takes one person in that chain of criminals to do that. And then you have them in custody and you can look at everything else. And there's more software which is becoming available, which helps people track this a lot better. And so for those out there that want to, do something naughty, I recommend cash over Bitcoin.
Disclaimer, this is not a tutorial on how to perform illegal activities using your money. That's on the Layah Heilpern Show. No, I'm just kidding. So Layah, finally, we got a few minutes left. Let's talk about tracking, the most severe and potent form of tracking with government intervention, CBDCs. You talked about this a lot on your own social media and on your own show. You told me offline you don't watch horror movies anymore because you feel like you're living in one. Now you feel you're scared of CBDCs and what they could do to us. Why are you scared, Layah? What is scary about CBDCs? Tell us.
Sure, I'm not personally scared. I'm strong. I'm ready to fight the fight. But CBDCs are very dangerous. They are central bank digital currencies. So they are basically a digital version of what we have now, but put on the blockchain. And the reason why that's worse, as opposed to, you can say, oh, it's a bit digital. We have it now. We can just sort of see the digital numbers in the bank account on an app on your phone. No, this is different because actually it is a cryptocurrency. It uses blockchain technology. This means the money is programmable. Okay. So if for whatever reason you hold the incorrect opinion, your money can be programmed to only be spent on certain items. And we know this to be true because at the heart of the pandemic, those that were unvaccinated weren't allowed in certain areas. They weren't allowed in certain shops. And I can't remember which country it is. Maybe it was Canada. I think it was Canada. But there was a headline which was basically saying that those who are unvaccinated have to be chaperoned inside of a store to make sure they're only buying essential items, right? Now, the government has to pay this chaperone. With a CBDC, nobody gets paid. This is efficient. This is efficient discrimination. We program the money of those dirty, unvaccinated people, and we say that can only be spent on certain items. Also, because we live in this supposed climate crisis, and meat apparently is bad for the environment. You might have reached you bought a lot of meat one weekend, and then you go to fill up your car with gas, your CBDC gets declined because you've reached your pollution allowance. So this is really a reality which is very nearby. Another scenario which I totally envisage is during times of economic uncertainty, central banks like to print more money in order to stimulate the economy, despite it pushing people further into poverty through inflation. They're doing it to protect you. That's why they print more money, right? So with a CBDC, they could say, hey guys, we need to stimulate the economy. We need that money to change hands. So in order for that money to change hands, you need to spend it. So if you don't spend 10% of your savings in the next 3 months, that money is going to expire. But David, we're doing it to protect you. We need that money to change hands. We need that money to stimulate the economy. And so therefore your money is again, literally being confiscated in a more efficient manner.
You're saying they can deposit money. Well, that's one of the arguments for CBDCs by the government. They say, well, it's efficient and we can help you by directly depositing the CBDC into your account without a third-party intermediary like a bank. It's a faster way to give you money.
It back.
Well, they can do that?
Take it back too.
Is that even legal?
Okay, is anything legal? Taxation is.
I mean, technically, if the government decides to do it, it's legal because it's the government. But yeah, you're right.
There you go. Yeah, I mean, everything we've spoken about anyway, right? Like inflation is taxation without legalization or without legislation. That's what inflation is. So nothing really is. Yeah.
Orwellian future you've painted for us, Layah. Thank you for leaving us on that unhappy note. But I do appreciate your insights.
Bitcoin is much more positive.
All right. Well, we'll have you back on to talk about the markets as they progress for sure. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing your thoughts about why we should own Bitcoin. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure, David.
Layah Heilpern of the Layah Heilpern Show, and you're watching Kitco News. Stay tuned.